Hey everybody, got a bit of a longer video today. In it we're going to learn how to dress and saute a whole chicken from scratch and finish it with a mushroom cream sauce. This dish is guaranteed to impress if done right. It involves a number of crucial home cooking skills that now I can't really live without, including how to disassemble a whole chicken, how to properly saute a chicken, and how to make a basic pan sauce. The inspiration, once again, is Julia Child, and I'll link to the inspiring videos below. This recipe calls for sauteed mushrooms, but I don't show you how to do that in this video. For that, you can either check out my similar video on beef in a mushroom cream sauce, or check out my standalone video on how to saute mushrooms. I'll link to both of those in the description below too. The method used for sauteing chicken here can be used in any recipe that calls for sauteed chicken, such as a chicken stew like coq au vin, and you can use any pan sauce you like to finish it, be it one with a red wine base, a white wine base, a chicken stock base, or a cream base as in this case. Now as a disclaimer, I just want to warn everybody that I'm starting with a whole chicken and showing you how to take it apart from scratch. So if you're not interested in learning how to do that or are squeamish about butchery, then skip to this time code. To prepare a chicken, all I need is the bird itself, a plate for the carved pieces, and a small saucepan used to make a quick chicken stock. Of course, you could always save the carcass, neck, and feet for a proper soup stock, but I found it quite satisfying to simply throw your extra pieces in a pot to boil as you're preparing everything else, which will leave you just with a bit extra essence of chicken to add to your pan sauce once the chicken is sauteed. We begin by washing our whole chicken. Notice how thick and yellow the skin is. This means that the chicken was quite healthy and had a diverse diet. You want to try and find chicken that looks like this rather than the kind with the pale, thin, white skin and the pinkish meat that you find in most US supermarkets anyway. The first thing I'm doing is taking the fat out from the edge of this cavity. You might want to use this to render for chicken fat, but for some reason I never end up using chicken fat for anything, so I don't bother, I just toss it. I'm washing the bird to make sure that it isn't all slimy when I cut it. Sliminess is a sign that there's an abundance of bacterial growth on the chicken, so you want to wash that off. A good way to tell how fresh your chicken is from the supermarket is also by checking how slimy it is. Once it's washed, bring the chicken over to the cutting board and pat it dry. The first thing to come off is the head. I've yet to be convinced that there's a use for it, so I just toss it. Next, chop further down the neck until you reach the breasts. Be careful not to cut any meat off the breast, especially if there isn't very much of it, like in the case of this bird. Then pull the skin off the neck and either toss it or use it to render chicken fat. Then add the neck to the saucepan to be boiled later. Next, we cut off the bottom part of the legs, or the feet. The trick is to find the joint, which contains only a few tendons and no bones. Once you do, you should be able to cut off the legs with a few fluid movements. Next, chop off the tail. Some people don't mind the tail, but for me it's a bit too close to the rear exit of the bird for my liking, so I toss it. Now comes the part where we disassemble the chicken into our pieces for cooking. The legs go first. We begin by slicing at the skin where the drumstick meets the breast. Once we open that space up a bit, we can grab hold of the thigh and separate the joint while slicing the skin around the edge of the thigh and up towards the back. Slice as closely to the lower back as you can, as there are a few lovely pieces of meat that are supposed to stay attached to the thigh, lest they be wasted on the rack. Continue to work your knife down the back around the thigh until you finally reach the joint before cutting through it. You should now have a full chicken thigh and drumstick. Repeat the process for the other leg. With our legless chicken, we slice through the ribcage along this line of fat in order to separate the breast from the rack. Once mostly separated, we start cutting towards the wishbone, which is the only bone connecting the breast to the rack. Once you find it, use heavy-duty kitchen shears to cut through it on each side. Then you can separate the rack from the breast. With the rack separated, you can take the bit of skin off the back, and this will eliminate excess fat in your stock. Next, we split the breasts. Especially with an older bird like this one, it's rather difficult to do this with any kind of delicacy, so I found that just trying to find the center as best you can and giving your knife a few good whacks does the job just fine, though you might hurt your hand. Alternatively, you can try and pop the breastbone out, but I've never been able to do this with any kind of consistency except on younger birds. Once we split the breasts, we then separate the wings. The trick again is to find the joint, but once you do, cutting should be easy. Finally, we separate our drumsticks and thighs. There's a line of fat that actually marks where the joint is, and so by simply forcing the knife downward along the line, you should be able to fully separate the two pieces with ease. A final touch to prepare the wings, we just turn them akimbo. This leaves them to have a similar size to the other pieces. So now we have our 8 pieces of a disassembled chicken. 2 thighs, 2 drumsticks, 2 breasts, and 2 wings. And a rack, a neck, and feet in the sauce pot to make stock with. For the stock, all we do is add some water and heat. You don't need to add anything else. All we're doing is stealing a little bit of extra chicken flavor from these scrap pieces, which we'll be able to utilize in our pan sauce later. After about 30 to 40 minutes, you should have most of the flavor out of the scraps, and so you can pour it over a strainer into a measuring cup. Once it cools a bit, you'll be able to degrease it, but it shouldn't have too much grease given the pieces that we used. Alternatively, if you have chicken stock ready or frozen, feel free to use that instead and freeze the scraps from your current chicken. This is just a method to quickly and efficiently utilize a whole chicken in a dish. At this point, we have all of our ingredients for our chicken sauté. We've got some cooking oil, refined coconut oil for now, and I also used some butter, though it's not in the picture. And we also have some salt and pepper, and some dry white vermouth. You can use white wine if you want, but I like dry vermouth because of its reliability not to make the sauce sour or sweet, which is especially important for a cream and mushroom sauce finish. And we have our chicken stock, a shallot, and our chicken pieces. As a final bit of preparation, we chop our shallot fine, first by slicing it in half, peeling it, cutting it horizontally, then vertically, and then perpendicular, giving us a fine mince. Now we begin the cooking process. We start by heating a tablespoon of butter and a teaspoon of cooking oil in a large frying pan. A non-stick pan will work just fine. However, I prefer using my heavy-bottom stainless steel pan. This is precisely because stuff sticks to it. Throughout the sautéing process, the pan develops a film of brown bits called fond. These are released during the deglazing process. If you use a non-stick pan, all of this fond sticks instead to the chicken and doesn't make it into the sauce. The fond sticking to the pan also has the benefit of making the pan much easier to degrease, as the brown bits you don't actually want to spoon off with the fat remain safely attached to the pan, awaiting deglazing. When the butter and oil are hot over medium-high heat, put the chicken in, skin side down. Try not to crowd the pan, but as long as you only have one layer of meat, the chicken should still brown. This initial cooking is just to brown the chicken on the outside and develop a crust for it. It should take about 2 to 3 minutes. Then flip and continue cooking for another 2 to 3 minutes. If we're using a stainless steel pan, it's fine if the chicken sticks at first. So long as the pan is sufficiently hot and you have sufficient oil, it will eventually come loose and leave you with a nice crust. Once both sides are nicely browned, remove the white meat, the wings and the breast. This is because dark meat takes longer to cook than white meat. Lower the heat to medium, cover the pan, and let the dark meat cook for about 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, remove the lid and flip the pieces. Replace the cover and let the chicken cook for another 5 minutes. After the dark meat has its 10-minute head start, flip the dark meat and add back in the white meat, skin side up. At this point, you want to add in your salt and pepper and give the pan a shake. You might also want to add in some herbs at this point, depending upon your final sauce. Usually when I'm just deglazing with something sour like wine or lemon juice, I like a bit of thyme or parsley. For a dry pan sauce using vermouth, I would recommend some tarragon. For a mushroom cream sauce like this one I'll be using, I don't add any extra seasoning beyond salt and pepper, and it tastes just fine to me. Once your spices are added, cover and allow to cook for 5 minutes. When 5 minutes have passed, uncover, flip the pieces, and cover again for a final 5 minutes. That's 5 minutes or so to brown all the pieces on both sides, 10 minutes of covered cooking in 5-minute intervals for the dark meat only, and then another 10 minutes of covered cooking in 5-minute intervals for all of the pieces. At this point, the chicken should be done. The way to test is to gently poke it with a steel knife and see if any pink or milky juices come out. If so, then cover and cook for an extra 5 minutes and test again. Alternatively, you can use an instant read thermometer to check. When it's all done, take the chicken out of the pan and put it aside. Once the pan is empty, degrease it either by pouring off the fat or by using a spoon. In my case, I just poured off the fat because the brown bits stuck to the bottom of my pan. Once you remove most of the fat, add in a few shallots and let them briefly heat up before then deglazing with stock and then with vermouth, maybe about half a cup each. Scrape the brown bits off the bottom of the pan and allow the mixture to boil and reduce a bit. At this point, when the mixture gets a bit syrupy, you might only want to finish the sauce with butter, pour it over your chicken, and serve, which is perfectly delicious on its own. We're going to take a few extra steps though by adding in about half a cup of cream and allowing that to simmer and reduce just a bit. Once the sauce is to your liking, add in your sauteed mushrooms and your sauteed chicken, and mix together over heat to allow the chicken and mushrooms to warm through. It's important not to allow too much liquid to boil off at this point. In fact, I almost did that here when I was messing with the camera. Cream sauces turn from too liquidy to burnt and ruined in a very short period of time. I was able to get this on the plate just in time, so the worst thing that happened was that we just left ourselves wanting a little bit more of this beautiful sauce, because it's delicious. And that's how you saute a whole chicken and finish it with a mushroom cream sauce.